Finance experts are predicting a rise in credit impairments in South Africa. This as consumers battle with high inflation and interest rates coupled with stagnant wages. Debt Rescue SA's Annaline joins us now for more. Annaline, thank you for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, we seem to have dodged a bullet in this last week with the rate hike remaining unchanged at 8.25%. However, the governor says there's still more tightening that will need to be done in the near future.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Indeed, I mean, obviously, the lower inflation number has played a role in their decision, but it's not where they want it yet. I mean, it's just below the 6% now, and it's the first time in a very long time. So obviously, they're going to have to be monitoring very, very closely, not just inflation. Obviously, there's more factors to it than just that. But yeah, for now we can at least breathe a sigh of relief for the next 2 months at least, knowing that it hadn't gone up again.
However, the banks are predicting a surge in the credit impairment, which will have serious repercussions on indebted South Africans, and we know how deep in debt many South Africans already are. What will the consequences of this be on consumers?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think many of the credit providers have already started releasing their stats to indicate what the impact is of the interest rates increases we've seen over the last year plus. And they can see the impact, meaning that consumers are already defaulting. And the reality is, even though the rate remains unchanged at this point, there's no change in circumstances for consumers. I mean, there is still inflation. So even though the interest hasn't gone up, there's still an inflationary impact on the living expense side of their budgets, which means that consumers have very little room to maneuver. And unfortunately, so many consumers are over indebted at this point that they are literally turning to credit to put food on the table and are ending up in a very, very difficult debt spiral, financing debt with more debt just to make ends meet every month.
And I mean, we know now that the consumer inflation has eased to 4.9% in June after recording a 30-month high of 5.2% in May of 2023, and the annual headline inflation cooled to 5.4% in June from 6.3% in May. Do you think that maybe a lower rate hike is on the cards in light of this?
Well, I think we're going to see in the next one, as I said, CPI is obviously a very big driver and a very big indicator, but it's also not the only factor that gets taken into account. I mean, we obviously look to global markets as well. If the interest rates in other countries continue, and especially if we look at the US and Europe, continue to increase, we will not be a competitive investment market if ours don't increase as well. So it's definitely, there's a whole lot of factors that need to be monitored to see what the future is going to hold for us in terms of whether we can see at least a pause and that this pause continues. But I do think it's going to be a while before we start seeing reductions in the interest rate.
And what impact would another hike then have on our consumers?
Look, if we were to see another hike, and as you've mentioned, the Reserve Bank governor said that by no means the fact that there wasn't one now doesn't mean that the hike cycle has stopped per se. If it were to happen that we do see more hikes for the rest of this year, I'm not sure how this is going to, how consumers are going to bear the brunt of this, because we know that impairments are high. The credit providers are telling us that consumers are struggling to repay their debt. And the reality is the impact on consumers means that if they start defaulting on payments, especially, if we start looking at assets like home loans and vehicles, they could face very serious situations here of legal action being taken. And in the case of assets, even possibly, looking at repossession. So if we look at even this getting even worse in the form of more interest rate hikes, we're definitely going to be seeing even more, situations where people are not able to pay the debt that they have, and it's getting worse.
And what do you think then would be the consequences on the country as a whole?
Well, it's obviously very, very bad if you sit with very high impairments, and obviously we start seeing massive increases in legal action being taken, so that we start seeing an increase in civil cases for debt. And judgments increase. It's not good on the economy when people are in such a position, because obviously what this also then means in the medium term is these people are going to become less economically active because they're not able to get further credit. If you have, bad debt or it starts affecting your credit report, credit providers are going to very likely tighten their measurements and their criteria before granting further credit. And it just has a spiraling effect on the economy when people aren't able to borrow and responsibly repay. You're going to see a massive slowdown in credit being granted. And it'll have a knock-on effect on our economy.
And what do you believe would get South Africans out of this trough? What needs to happen? What needs to happen within our economy for us to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel?
A lot of things. I think one of the most important things that we need to see right now is economic growth. And this means the stabilization of our electricity grid. We need to make sure that businesses can operate effectively. We need to create environments where we can see foreign investment increase into the country, where people feel comfortable that our economy is stable enough that we can handle things like electricity loads and that our infrastructure is set up, so that we can look at employment opportunities. We have a very high unemployment rate. And only through that can we start a positive cycle of where people are employed, are earning decent salaries, and are able to then become economically active again, thereby stimulating the economy. But there's a lot of factors beyond the consumer's control, where we need to look at to ensure that we stabilize our country's economy.
All right, Annaline, thank you so much for your time this evening. Always an interesting chat with you. We do hope, like you say, that some of those factors will be able to turn the country around and for consumers to get their heads above the water. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. That's Annaline van der Poel from Debt Rescue speaking to us there.